Great. So let's get started today. We're thrilled to have Jenny O'Brien joining us today in our MentorCore session on how you navigate the matrix. Jenny is the Chief Compliance Officer over at United Healthcare, and she's a lovely person in addition to her
Thank
corporate
you.
role. She also is a board member of an organization that you'll hear a little bit more about when she tells us about herself. But my name is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker, and I am one of the co-founders of MentorCore along with my friend Dan.
Hello.
And so first off, let's start today just by having, Jenny, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you came into compliance and what you're doing, a little bit about, your board roles with SCCE, HCCA, and other organizations. Tell us about you.
Yeah, great. Well, first of all, hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. As Lisa Beth said, I am currently the Chief Compliance Officer of United Healthcare. I have been here 10 years in a variety of compliance roles across lines of business, and it is the longest job I've ever had. I usually moved jobs around 5 years or so, and have absolutely loved my time here, and it's been challenging, and part of it is because I've learned to navigate the matrix and even embrace the matrix. So look forward to this discussion that we're going to have. My background, I'm an attorney by background, started off at the Attorney General's office, loved that job, and actually ended up with one of the lowest of my choices of an area to work in, which ended up being healthcare. And I'm like, shoot, well, who knew? Best thing that ever happened to me is I got my fifth choice of divisions I was going to work in, and ended up in the health fraud, healthcare licensing divisions, and now I've been in healthcare my entire career. From the Attorney General's office, I made a move into compliance. This was about 2000, probably 2002 or 3, and really didn't know there were 7 elements to a compliance program, and thought, boy, that sounds interesting. The work sounded interesting, and so I said yes, kind of made a big leap of faith for about 6 months, 7 months. If they would have said, you can go back to the Attorney General's office, I probably would have gone running back, because I was trying to figure out what is this role and how am I adding value to the organization. But as you can tell, I've now been in this, in compliance roles pretty much for most of my career. I worked at a large integrated provider, nonprofit healthcare system. Went back into the law for 2 years thinking I better go practice law again, or maybe I'll forget how. And as I did, I realized, nope, where my passion is back in compliance. And so I came into United Health Group. It's been a fantastic journey, opportunity, and still am thoroughly enjoying it. Lisa Beth mentioned board work. I've always had a passion around board work. It was advice I got early on in my career, is you should be on a nonprofit board and start with something you have a passion for. So I was at Phillips Eye Institute, where they did free eye screenings for public school students where the nurses had been cut out of the budget. Learned a lot there, was part of a capital campaign. I then became part of the Healthcare Compliance Association, Society of Corporate Compliance, was the president of that association, and I'm still part of it. Have a huge passion around the compliance profession and continue to give back and educate and really continue to move the compliance profession forward. And then the final board I'm currently on as well is MentorCore Mercy Health. It's about a $10 billion organization out of Cincinnati, and I now have been the chair of their audit and compliance committee for the last couple of years, which has been another new great development and growth opportunity as I get to sit on the other side, the board side, when I do that, yet I'm on the staff side of my day job. So as you can tell, each of those are learnings and development opportunities that I still look for and seek out no matter where I am in my career journey.
It's amazing. So as we start talking today, we're going to navigate the matrix, embrace it. What do we even mean by the matrix?
Yeah, so in my world, and I think there are matrices that people can define them a little bit differently, but I think one thing we could all agree on, it's where you have dual or multiple managerial accountabilities or reporting. Sometimes people say, oh, I directly report to so-and-so, and I indirectly report to so-and-so. In my company, I have a direct report into our CEO, but I feel like I have an indirect report into about 4 or 5 other people and that I'm accountable to understand what their business needs are, what their business priorities are, what their goals are, and then really, use those different chains of command. Sometimes it's along a functional line, sometimes it's along a product line, sometimes it's along a client line. And so it's where you really sit and look out across, and I sometimes feel as I'm a conductor of an orchestra, and I sit here, and they're the different sections, and I have to help everybody play their notes, however different instrument they might have, so we can make some music and deliver on our, accountable items that we've committed to deliver for the organization.
I really like that analogy of being a conductor and trying to make beautiful music as everyone is playing their own tune potentially.
And some are lip syncing, right? They're like pretending they're playing, but they're not.
Right.
They're like,
We've all seen that if you've been around long enough.
With rogue other conductors peppered around, trying to draw them into different directions as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Take that,
yes.
John Williams.
So
I love that.
During your time with United Health, has it always been a matrixed organization, or is this something that as a company grows and develops, it just sometimes decides to move in a different direction and have these, matrices where you've got a lot of informal and as well as formal reporting relationships?
Yes, so during my time, it has been a matrix organization, but I have many colleagues here who it wasn't, and it grew into a matrix organization. And I think as we look across the industry and all the tailwinds, I don't care if you're in healthcare, manufacturing, we're seeing a lot of that, especially what's going on now, with COVID-19, and companies are consolidating and looking for different business opportunities, right, adjacencies. I think the matrix is only going to continue to be a really big part of it. But for me, I knew I was coming into a matrix organization, and part of my interviewing was to answer the question, can you be an effective leader in a matrixed organization when you haven't been in one before? And so when I hire or interview people to come in, I'm very transparent that, navigating the matrix is a skill set, and it's not for the faint of heart. And for some people, they might not prefer to be in a matrixed organization, and that's not wrong or right. I just think it's important people know the culture and the environment they're coming in, because they're going to have a strategy that fits that to be effective in this type of business model.
That's a really good perspective. I kind of, think about it like being a seed, right? Is the ground that you're going to be planted in fertile soil for you? Because, right, it is for you, because some people grow really well in acidic environments and some seeds don't do so well. Some need lots of water, some don't. And I think that, when you think about how people enter the workplace, right, it's as much of a question of, is this the right place for you to grow and develop as it is, is this a good job, et cetera, right? It's got to be the whole picture of the long-term growth and development on both sides.
Yeah, I say when I interview people, I want them to come in eyes wide open and realize this is what they meant. They don't have to have been at a matrix organization. I wasn't, and I learned it. But because I came into this, there was a lot of growth I had to do on my own to get that learning curve go a little faster, and a lot of questions I had to ask and be vulnerable and ask the right people as how to be the most effective. And I like that. Some people, it's not what they want, and then it might not be the right organization. So I think you're exactly right. Eyes wide open, knowing the type of business model culture you're coming into is really important in deciding yes or no. Is this where I want to spend my career in development?
What are the traits you're looking for as signs? I've spent most of my career when I was in enterprise in inevitably matrixed organizations. So it's what I've grown up with, and it's actually a little strange when you have a single boss.
Yeah.
But so as you're looking at it, coming in from the outside, what are the traits that were important to making you successful? And those that you look for and those that you're bringing into a matrix organization?
Yeah, so Dan, I'll share mine, and then I'd love to hear yours, because
Sure.
there might be some more I need to start looking for, right? So I look for more so than competency, because if people are coming in to be, an head of investigations or a chief compliance officer, one of my lines of business, or an auditor, the competency is most likely there. I look more for emotional intelligence, to be agile, flexible, be able to read your audience. In a matrix, you have to be able to adapt to a variety of different types of leaders and not expect them to adapt to you. So I look for learners, people that want to have that challenge of figuring out how can I be a value proposition and talk and have a language and communicate one way to one type of a personality, versus another type of a personality, and get into their world and be excited about that figuring that strategy out and being a planner is what you need to do before you start the real work. And then how do you present that information to them? So I look for high EI, people who are flexible, agile. Lateral movement is good. Do you always need to move and get the next promotion, or can you look at all these lateral opportunities that really position you for that next movement? And some people don't have patience for lateral movement.
Right.
They like to go one direction. So that's what I look for, is life learners, people who want to develop in a number of ways and see that bigger picture. So I'd like you to add how you describe it, and maybe
Yeah,
I
I
can
like those. The two I'd add, one is experience with organizational change management. So
good.
somebody who can come in and understands, and these kind of are related. The other one is leading by influence. So being able to take, and this, it ties to your EI comment, but being able to not exert a distinct authority, you must do it because I said to do it, but rather using their influence, using their emotional capabilities, their ability to connect, their ability to learn and understand other businesses, to help people want to come along on the journey with them. And then the other is that organizational change management, having enough ability to identify the key influencers in an organization that you want to make sure come along on the journey, because they are the people others will ask, hey, are we okay if we do this? What do you think? Those are to bring those people along, and good communicators. This is not a skill that's often found in technology areas, or in at least in the security and risk side. It's not a default. I think it's quite a bit more, especially on the attorney side. Allocution is something that that comes with the game, but
emotional intelligence generally isn't.
You said
let's be honest.
You said it, not me. But just being able to bring all those things together, it's almost a unicorn package of very hard to find, all those things together. But I think those help navigate a matrixed organization. Again, like you said, assuming the competency. You just have to assume the competency. The rest is how you take the competency and actually do something with it in that type of an org.
I think those are great additions. Well said.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add in is self-awareness. Self-awareness is so key, because I've seen so many people go in like bulls in a china shop, and it just is catastrophic in a matrixed organization where I think influence is what leads. So I think that it's really important to be aware of what's going on and connect with people in a really meaningful way when you don't have direct power over them and you're not working in a silo. So for compliance in a matrixed organization, how is that different from other functions?
I get that question a lot, and I first start out saying, because I work with so many operational leaders across the company, first of all, it's not. We're not that special. It's about leadership, right? So all the things you all described had to do with being a strong leader. And so when I look at that, I first start out saying, I think it's challenging for any type of leader, whether you are the financial leader, you're the head of communications, you're all these different roles. We all have to have these things. Where it's a little different for compliance is people look at us to be, as I talked earlier, the conductor, the translator. we're the ones that group all of these together. And so as I say, each of those that I just mentioned that come to the table, the operations leader, whoever it might be, need to, IT, need to have the same thing. But our role, I really think how we add value is we are the ones that facilitate, translate, and make sure there are milestones. We hold people accountable. We put a business owner to each area. We put time frames. We're the ones that have the processes to escalate something up when it's not going to, when the project isn't going as timely as it is, and can package it up so you can get those other leaders together to say, we need your help now. We've run into a barrier. It's not working. Here's the questions that need to be answered. Then we sit back and let the business people respond to those, right? At the same time, we do it in a way that no one feels like they've been thrown under the bus or been put out there to look like they've failed. And so we're managing a lot of relationships, a lot of priorities, and all at the same time trying to keep the project moving along. So including the project manager that might be on the project, right? We are not the project manager, but we just play that role of facilitation, escalation, and then call the question. When is it time for the business to call the question of, is this still a priority or not? And let those business people call the question. What would you add, Lisa Beth, on that? You've played that role a lot. You know exactly what I'm thinking of that balance between being, oh, you're the project manager versus, no, you're the strategic leader on here in a compliance role, raising these questions up, but letting the business lead and be accountable for where this project goes, where the accountability stays. So what would you add to that? I've seen you do it masterfully. How would you describe it?
I think it's really important that the business understand that they do have a role in this, right? Because what often will happen, and this I think happens in information security, it happens in compliance and legal, is everyone says, I don't know what to do, you make the call, but then you're running the business. I don't get I don't get paid to run the business,
Yeah, the
and
monkey's on your back now.
it's not the right way to do this. So I always talk about setting up, kind of the framework and the boundaries. But while the conductor is doing the music, right? It's directing the music. It's not actually the conductor doesn't play every note.
Right.
Right? That's not a good use of resources, the skills and the talents. And, in some companies, there isn't a project manager, and it does end up falling on either information security or compliance or risk. And then you have to differentiate, what you're doing as your professional role and what you're doing to manage the project and make it move forward. So some of it depends on how big is the organization, what are the resources, but it's also making sure that the business doesn't, cede their decision making or put compliance in a role that it was never meant to be in, which is compliance is not meant to run the business.
Nor to
just to add to that,
nor to make business decisions, nor to make business decisions on, I guess, on where on the continuum the organization lives, either on a risk scale, on a compliance scale, or other things where there is variability.
Right.
Advice,
Trusted advisors, not decision makers.
Exactly.
I
was just going to add real quickly, Lisa Beth, when you were saying that, I wanted to make sure when I talked about conductor, there are only certain times I'm the conductor, and it's a compliance regulatory risk type issue. I spend most of my time finding who should be the conductor from the business. So as we talk about this to everyone out there, I do want to make that distinction, because we were talking about when, from a compliance issue, compliance risk for the organization, I will play that role, but the majority of the time it's making sure the conductor is a business owner. And that's sometimes my job, that's why we have an issue, is because we did not identify a business owner who was the conductor. So I hope that's not confusing, but I think it's important as we use that analogy to also say in what limited times do we take that baton and take on that conductor role.
Right. So we got a question in the chat that I want to turn to really quickly, because I think it's helpful to clarify a little bit. The question in the chat is, I've heard a lot of people say, serve on a board, which is, you know, a piece of advice. But very few people giving that advice get to the how to do that, how to get chosen. How do you identify opportunities? You know, what does that process look like? Are there any tips or actionable steps?
So I'll share my experience, and I'm sure you both have some as well. The first time I was on a board, I actually found a not-for-profit I was passionate about, volunteered, and then there were openings for board members to come on. And so that's how it happened. I created that opportunity. That's why I said, you know, follow something you're passionate about. And then they asked me, I interviewed, but it wasn't hard to get on it. There's a lot, people are looking for board members. Be careful.
In the nonprofit space, for sure.
Yeah.
In the nonprofit space, it's a great way to learn, but that's why I said follow a passion, because with it comes quite a bit of volunteering time. Make sure they have a strong executive director or leader, or pretty soon you go from being a board member to your day job becomes your board member job, and they want you to cross that line. So, you know, and I'd gotten that advice before I did that. So it was a very, it was a strong board. It was a great way for me to come in, learn how to be a board member. Then I became, you know, a chair of one of the committees. And so it was great. And then the next opportunities that came up, part of the reason I got them was because I had demonstrated leadership at a board. And so as I go into my board journey, now I'm on a $10 billion organization. If I hadn't been at that smaller organization, I don't know if I would have been able, you know, they might have looked for somebody else. So I continue to gather skills and pretty much started out as voluntary. I'm still on voluntary boards. I am not paid to be on any boards, but my goal someday, I love governance, is to be a board member. For, I'm not quite sure I'm doing that research right now. That's my next thing is, gosh, I should, you know, what's the next step in this board work? So I started very small with a passion and got on a board that the bar was not real high to get on, but because I'd shown that I was passionate of their cause, they were willing to invest in me and teach me some things. So I keep expanding my growth and my opportunity. It's very intentional, and there is a strategy to it, and that you should go into and some research and understand when you join that board, what are you committing to? Because you can get a little over your ski tip sometimes if boards want you to start helping them be part of the management team while being a board member.
Yeah, that's really important to keep that arm's length and keep the separation. Otherwise, your role as a board member really does become compromised.
Well, and I think, you know, particularly when you're talking about nonprofit boards, not only is there a desire to potentially have you, you know, engage in some of the day-to-day, but if there's any disruption, it can take a lot of time, right? If you have a turnover of an executive director, if you're having, like, I mean, hello, we're in the middle of COVID. A lot of nonprofits are having problems with keeping the lights on. So board members for nonprofits are working very hard these days for some of those organizations because it's one of those make it or break it moments. And if you have multiple boards and they're all going through a financial crisis like has been taking place with COVID, it can be very challenging. And you don't want to not provide the support that is expected of you as a board member.
Yeah. Just to add one more thing, I kept my boss, this is part of my development, so I brought them along on my journey and said, I would like to do some board work. A, would you support it? Because you do need the support from your manager. And then what tips do you have? Because he was on boards. So he was all in and helped me get smarter. But each board I'm on, and the bigger of the board I go on, you know, there's a lot of things you have to watch out for with conflicts and make sure your day job supports that type of board and it's not competing with some of the products you have at work. So it started out pretty simply, and I used my boss to help me be part of my development, and I was fortunate to have someone who believed in that. So bring other people along on your journey because they can help you, and you're going to need to frankly, usually sign a conflict of interest and make sure they're along and the organization is aware you're on that board and they support that you're on that board.
Those are great ideas. The only thing that I would add to that is again, with nonprofits, oftentimes they have like galas or some type of
Yeah.
fundraiser, and you can volunteer to be on like a committee that's not a board committee. And that's a good way to get some visibility and get some exposure to the organization before you'd even think about joining as a board member, because you do want to know not only like what they do, but how they do it and whether it aligns with what your values and goals are before you start committing that time to anything. Um, so how have you had to flex your style to succeed in a matrixed environment? Because you talked about agility and adaptability, and I know we've got another session that's going to come up at the end of the month about using agile in your compliance career, but how have you flexed your leadership style?
Yeah, I think Dan hit on a lot of them when he talked about it. First of all, I pause before I start and really work to understand the matrix. And quite often, it's bigger than you think it is. So right when you think you've identified the key stakeholders and you've identified the matrix of what does it even mean, so who is in this matrix, the more you talk to people, the more you might find one little part over here that you didn't quite think about, and they're a key part of moving the matrix along. The other thing is really communication, which I think Dan mentioned, is both verbal and in your, much of it is email written, right? Because we're all over and a lot of it's virtual right now. And so really making sure that there's an alignment on what the project is, what the outcomes are, who are the owners of each of the various areas that have to move things along, what are your time frames around that. So there's so much work to go up front to make sure you're not halfway through the project. And why I am focused on this is early on, I didn't do this as well. And you'd get about halfway through and you'd think, oh my gosh, I'm not sure we're aligned on the outcome. We said we were, everybody agreed, but did we really talk about what success was and what that outcome was, and did everybody agree? And I've gotten much better that I start at the top with what the outcomes are, and then go with the working team. Instead of start in the middle and think it's going to filter up, that each one that's on the team is going to make sure they keep their executive owners aligned. I start much more now with, say, here's what's going on, here's what we agree with, we all agree, and boy, quite often you find out there's not alignment. And that extra meeting before it kicks off can save you so much time. And then when there's all that swirl in the middle, you can go right back to that first thing is, nope, this was the agreed upon outcome. Has that changed? Because sometimes it does. And if it has, then we adjust. But quite often it hasn't, and people just didn't quite buy in. They said yes, but didn't know what it meant. And if you have that executive ownership buy-in and can just keep pulling that one up there, then your executive owners appreciate it too, because they're not getting pulled in on all these little issues, right? So those are some learnings where I've had to really rethink what it means to kick off a project, who it means to involve, and making sure there is alignment, and then revisiting that alignment and that it hasn't changed as the project's gone on. Some really good learning.
Question for you. You talked about communication. How do you handle direct conflict? Right? You've talked a little bit about, like, sometimes people will say yes, but really they didn't truly buy in. What if you've got people who are directly pushing back and saying, nah, not on my watch?
Yeah. So I've gotten much better at handling direct conflict. I let it fester a little too long initially, and now I address it much better. So I've learned. I've watched people who can handle direct conflict and thought, wow, they handle that really well. Now, we might not have the same styles, but I'll go meet with them to say, how did you handle it? Because they didn't handle it in that one meeting I saw. They had been doing work behind the scenes to get to what they did in that one meeting I saw. So I am learning how to handle direct conflict more head-on, more strategically. And the other part, too, is what I talked earlier. I get buy-off from the executives and don't spin at that middle level as long, and go right to double-check, and you say, has this changed, and then come right back. And you know, as I call it, stop the swirl earlier so we can get the work done. So I don't know if either of you have additions to that, but those are things that I found helpful. But I've had to learn. I've had to get better at handling it, more comfortable.
Yeah, I think I would agree that, you know, the pre-work is as important as what happens during the meeting. Um,
Absolutely. The meeting should just be a set of confirmations.
yeah.
It ends up becoming much more of a set of confirmations when really the agreements are taking place in individual. So it's for me, it's been almost a time multiplier. It is harder and there is more drag in working in a matrixed organization because you do have a bunch of different constituencies that need care, they need feeding, they need communication, they need to understand that somebody is listening to their perspective and helping to balance it into the big picture. And it doesn't just happen once, it happens continuously. And that is the role of the executive sponsor or the matrix leader is, what boulders are in your way? How can I clear them? And the boulder might be somebody else involved in the project. But I think and this comes back to leading with influence, but sometimes you do end up having to do a bit more direct conflict resolution, and getting two people into a room and saying, we're at an impasse and we need to get through this. Let's talk it through, and have a summit and get to the end point. Because otherwise you can waste 3, 4, 5 months of just spinning, like you said, like that stop the swirl.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and just to say, usually in the matrix, they're large, complex projects. They're not the
Yes.
easy ones, right? So Dan, as you're talking about that, I don't want people to think, oh my gosh, every project's this way. I think the ones we're thinking of are the really
True.
large, complex ones that need all of this care and feeding and strategy. So as people hear this, there are many in the matrix that go very smoothly. So I think, I just want to, and maybe Dan and Lisa Beth, we're thinking of the ones that really need leadership, because those are large, complex ones. So I don't want people to get too scared of the matrix, because there is a lot of positives, but the ones I'm thinking of are very complex projects, which is why our leadership is there for it, right? It needs it.
Right.
right.
But on a micro scale, it's important still to check in with people. The communication, I think, transcends it. You scale it to the size of organization and size of the project. But staying in touch helps identify those issues earlier before they become those critical conversations.
Well, and one of the pieces of advice that I got early in my career is you should never ask a question that you're not 100% sure the answer to in like public. You should really know where this is going to go. Like, do your research, make sure that you've laid the groundwork so that you're not surprised. Nobody likes surprises, especially when it's at a critical moment. So we have a bunch of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Including about interviewing. You said that you assume that people have competence, right? That they can actually do the technical part of the job, but you're looking for something more. So your comment on lateral hiring. The question behind that is, how long would you recommend staying in a role before making a lateral move to avoid looking like a job hopper? And relatedly, if you have compliance experience, but you don't have, for example, healthcare or highly regulated or, financial services or whatever, but you want to make the leap into a more specialized field, but don't have the ability to maybe take a cut or a step backwards, what advice would you give on that?
So I'll go with the first one, about how long do you stay in a role. I don't think there's a magic formula to that. To me, it's about what's your story, right? And maybe that's why I've been at this company for so long, is every year, one of the great words of advice I got was see a gap, fill a gap, right? And some people don't want to fill a gap till they know, what does that mean? Do I get extra compensation? Do I get a promotion? Can I change my title? Can I do these things? And other people just go fill gaps and do work because they're excited and they do it, and then the reward might come a little bit later, but it's a natural progression, right? So I'm a see a gap, fill a gap type of person who asks questions later. I'm not saying that's necessarily the right thing, but that has created many opportunities. So I look for people that come in and different things come up and they want to go and they still have their job, but say, I want to learn about that too. We have a new product. Let me learn about that product. I can be the lead on that till we see, does the product really go or what's going to happen? And then maybe 6 months later, that's part of what their job is, And then, that's what's more lateral, right? And then you make sure and you look and come back and say, I'm going to rewrite my job description. This is now my job. And I've done that a couple times in my career because I do this, see a gap, fill a gap. And I come back and I say, this is what I'm doing now, because people don't always realize all the new things, where you've stretched, where you've grown, what you've done. So be accountable for your own career development. And in the environment I'm in at this company, that works well. If you're at a company that is pretty stable and doesn't have a lot of growth and a lot of change, that's probably not the same strategy, and you might have to think to do something different, you really have to almost do and go and get a new job. So as I share my learnings, I want to make sure, again, we go back to environment and culture of where that's at, and that works well. When I was at the nonprofit integrated healthcare system, that didn't work well because it wasn't as large, it didn't move as fast, it didn't grow as fast. So please add to what I just said, either Lisa Beth or Dan, on how long do you stay in something. And I hope that answer wasn't directly on point, but I just want people to think about it a different way. And what does stay in one place mean? Because for me, I never really sat too long and always have had these natural expansions of roles. But I've thought them out.
Yeah. So I'll go first. I think that part of this is about defining what you want and being intentional, right? Some people are very happy to say, I've got the ideal role. I don't want anything to change. This is where I'm happy because I found my balance for what I want in my life. I think a lot of times people start hopping to other jobs because they think something is going to make them happier. Or there's something missing in their life that they want to fill, right? And if it's the right formula, then great, right? Everybody's got a different journey. But I think the most important thing is that it has to be your own journey, and it has to be right for you, not look right on paper, but feel terrible. Because I think after a certain point, you've probably been in a job where it should look great on paper, but it's not great in real life. And so in terms of finding that right fit, look at all the different factors. Do you have support from your executive team? Do you have support from your manager? There is nothing better than having a great manager who really, really, really supports you. That's worth its weight in gold. And you can help to refine and define what the role is over time within most organizations. So how long do you need to be in a role? Is it the right role for you? And are there opportunities to grow and develop? And does it fit in with your life plan? And the only person that can answer that is you.
I tend to go into a role. I tend to try and start things the way knowing how I want to end them. Go into a role, knowing what the exit looks like. And when you stop seeing the role heading you toward that exit, then it might be time to cut it loose. That exit could be either a defined amount of time. It could be finishing an initiative or crossing a finish line, for a compliance deliverable. A new law takes effect, we get ready to go, and we launch for that. It could be to grow enough this way to be able to to be prepared for your next either up or over role. But if you stop seeing the path, you need constant evaluation. Not step on the scale every day, death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of evaluation, but at regular intervals to say, is what I'm doing still taking me toward that? And is my being here helping myself and the organization? Because there's a point in time in which, if neither of those are true, then it is time to go, regardless of what the calendar looks like. I think the other thing to keep in mind is there are going to be times when we each need to take a role. We need to take a job because we need to for the paycheck. The reality of oftentimes people gloss over the fact that you need to eat. You need to feed your family and pay the rent. There are going to be those times. There is nothing wrong with that. We work and we get paid to work. So keeping that in the cycle as well. I think people often feel badly about taking a role or making a jump or doing something because of the money. It may not get you towards some of those end goals, but the reality is you do need to do what it takes to take care of yourself along the way as well. It's part of taking care of yourself.
Yep. And then the other question was about, what if you haven't been in a, specialized field, but you want to move into one? Um, my own perspectives on that are, right, why, if there's something that you think that, you're going to get out of that role, then be really clear about why you want to move into a specialized space or into a specific industry. And then B, like I always think, get to know people who are already there, follow along with whatever webinars are out there where you can get additional perspectives, both from a human perspective like we're doing today, but also from a technical perspective, because you probably need some additional technical skills or a knowledge of specific regulations in these different industries and how they're interpreted differently by the regulators, et cetera. What would you say, Jenny, in terms of, if there's somebody who, has never worked in healthcare or never worked in, insurance or whatever, what would you say to them if they felt like they wanted to go into this more specialized space?
Yeah, I agree with many of the things you said. First of all, there's a lot of similarities regardless of industry. I think of healthcare versus the airline industry, both very heavily regulated. Both have, but you have to understand the challenges within each one. And so I agree. And if you're going to and want to change, get really smart about that. Understand what's different, and don't come in, and some people do this saying, oh, I know this, I know. And people are like, but you really don't. Until you live and breathe in an industry, I don't care if it's finance, understand what banking, what does it mean to be a compliance professional in banking versus healthcare? Very different jobs. But they're both compliance, but very different roles for the organization. And a great example, when I think of why it's great to bring people in with other ways to think about things, we had an issue in healthcare where we were having trouble getting timeliness. I'm going to give an example of an appeal or a grievance, right? It has to be decided if it's within either 3 days or 7 days. And boy, we're so special as healthcare, we were treating it different. Somebody came in from the airline industry and said, I've been in operations in the airline industry. If we can track a piece of luggage around the world, why can't we track a claim? And it really tipped the thinking over of, yes, we are special in this, but so is the airline industry, right? And suddenly, it brought a new way of thinking of it. Think of a claim as a piece of luggage, and all of a sudden, we fixed it faster. It took a lot more work, but so I think bringing people in from other industries and going into other industries, you bring some new ideas. But if you go in, do your homework, and as you said, talk to people and say, what does it mean to spend a day as in operations in the airline industry or at Best Buy or at U.S. Bank, right? And don't assume you know because you've walked into a bank or you've flown an airplane. Big difference.
Or you've bought a computer once upon a
Or
time.
you've bought a computer, yep. So, be humble and learn is what I would say.
Yeah. I think the other thing is now, the last 6 months have created a flurry of content for people to learn about industry, to learn about topics. This exact podcast, this exact webcast being one of them. And I think there's a lot out there to be able to get an insight into how people in industries that you're not part of operate, and do so without exerting a dollar. It's just time and listening, and then connecting with those people, either through LinkedIn or finding local affinity groups, to say, hey, can we talk a little bit more? So much about hiring is also about the relationships you have. So building those relationships in advance of that, it's a long tail, is helpful as well, both to learn it, but then also when you're ready to make the move, to say, hey, I'm ready. Can you help me? Can you help introduce me to the right people?
Great point.
So one question that I have for you is, as people come into a complex organization, perhaps it's a matrix organization, maybe it's just a very complex organization, what skills do they need to have to find ways to thrive? I know you said that you've learned a lot. Like, how have you learned a lot, and what did you learn that made it easier for you to thrive?
Yeah, so first of all, I think self-awareness, admitting what you need to know and learn. Now, there's that fine balance of, as I always say, my husband, I remember when my kids were really little and they were heading off to daycare, and he's like, boys, remember two things. Act like you've been there and say it with conviction. And they grab their little backpack and off they go, right? And I'm sitting in the kitchen thinking, I need to do that at work today. Act like you've been there and say it with conviction. So you need to balance. They've hired you to be in this role and do things. So you need to balance that confidence, that demonstrating that leadership presence with the humility and understanding of what you do need to learn, who are the right people to ask, and how are you going to, figure out that path. So managed care was brand new for me. And people knew when I came here, I did not have managed care. I had a healthcare experience, but working in a provider system versus a managed care organization, completely different type of role. And so, transparent of what I knew and committed to what I would learn, and then go and learn it, but you don't bring everybody with you on your journey of learning it. So balancing of when is the right time to ask questions, who's the right person to ask questions with, right? When there were a number of products that I had to learn, I didn't go to our head of products. They're so busy. I went to a couple levels down and went to some product meetings of when they were doing product sessions. Do you mind if I sit and listen to these meetings and learn about this? And they loved it, and I learned so much. When I was at the hospital system, I went on an ambulance ride along from midnight to 6 in the morning in January because I'm like, what is it really? We're asking them to do things, but their world is so different than mine. So I said, can I go on an ambulance ride along? Brought a bunch of donuts, showed up at midnight. I learned so much from 12 to 6 on that ambulance, those ride-alongs, and I became much better at my job. So think of ways that you can integrate yourself into the business in a way that also you belong there, right? And you're not making excuses, but you're at the table learning, and people know you don't know everything. So those are just a few examples of how I've done that within my career. Is I've not been shy, but I asked to go to, not disrupt a meeting, but go right along and be in on the planning of product planning. And it's fascinating. And then I have more questions. I go to another meeting over here to say, wow, tell me about the local markets. Tell me about this. But I do be careful not to be disruptive, and ride along with it.
And think about the connection you build when doing that too with that group. Hey, he or she cared enough to come and find out what we're doing. When they're later, you've now got this connection, just like when you're traveling and you spend time and you get the ability to eat with colleagues that you don't. That's where you build the relationship. Same kind of thing. When you now have a project to work on together in a matrixed environment, there's so much less friction, so much more oil along the way that makes it a much easier interaction. And because they know you know and care about their business. They're part of the business.
Yeah, it's walking their shoes a little bit, right?
Exactly.
And yeah. I also always say, make sure that when there are town halls that you're going to them, make sure that if there are opportunities, like at Best Buy, I worked in a store, and I went to a call center and spent time at call centers at a couple of jobs that I had, but understanding like what the on the ground first line is doing is really important. So we have another question. You talked about getting alignment on a project by starting with the executive level sponsors so that like this is the direction we're all heading in. What tips do you have for getting that buy-in if you don't have access to the executive level? Like influence can help, but without executive access, there might be roadblocks. Have you ever seen a situation like that, or would you have any advice for somebody who's sitting in that position?
Yeah, so if I don't have access, I use people who do and get my messages in through them. Sometimes I should have access, but it's hard to get people to want to meet with you, right? I have and so if you can say, go build that relationship. Well, that door's not always open, right? So you recognize when it is and think, I had this one CEO who said, Jenny, there's always another move. So I think, okay, what is that move? Do I really need the executive sign-off, or is that just something I have on my list I'm going to get? And is there someone else? So just because, it's executive, do you need that? And if the answer is yes, if I can't get it, do I know someone else who can help make sure they get that, and I keep it short and sweet. They just want to make sure you're aligned. This is the end goal, and it's 2 or 3 sentences long, right? So, there's different paths there and different levels. Some people want to go to the highest because it makes them feel good, and they don't need to. So really recognize what is the level of sign-off you need, and then if you're not getting it, is there someone else who can get it in front of them? And if then not, that's one of your issues. That's going to be an issue with your project, right? And so recognize that, and either you work around it or you call that out with other people saying, we have buy-off from everybody but this one area. Does anybody know, can someone get this there? And if you can't, that's going to be a gap all the way through your project.
Right. So the time has flown by, and I still have so many. I think we could talk for another couple of hours, but I want to make sure that we get in our signature question, which is, what's the best advice that you've ever received from a mentor?
Yeah, the best advice is, I received a number of years ago, watching someone who was successful, and I watched them get a seat at the executive table as more than the compliance officer or the compliance professional. And I said, how did you accomplish that? And he said, Jenny, be relevant in every interaction. And by being relevant, so just not today or in this meeting today, but as I go into meetings, I think, how can I be relevant in this meeting? And most of the time, being relevant means probably not saying anything at that meeting, might be some other things. And so everyone's like, what is the thing I can say that everyone's going to look at me and say, what a brilliant leader? And he's right. Most of the time, being relevant means not talking when you really could. And you watch a lot of people who talk when they probably don't need to, and what do we think? We're like, here they go again, right? But the other is speak up when you need to. And I think we've all had that feeling, when you have that feeling in your stomach or you're thinking, I really need to speak up, and it's a big risk. And sometimes when you talk, you don't even sound like you're talking, right? That's courage, and now there's times to be relevant. I don't care what your role is across the organization, and teaching yourself to be able to be relevant and speak up when it's probably one of the hardest things and it's a bit at risk. Fortunately, most of the time is I don't say anything because I don't need to. It's been said. But it's that being relevant in your role and understanding when it's your time to step up and do your job. It's been great advice, and I use it all the time, especially when I don't know what to do. I ask myself, how can I be relevant in the role I have? And the answer comes pretty quickly. Zip it, or you better get your hand up and be articulate and ask the question that needs to be asked.
Is that your natural state, though? To be quiet and
No.
quiet and held back? Or is this something you have to work at?
So this is something that you've done and trained yourself to do?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm an extrovert. I'm an extrovert, and I love to help people solve problems. Just ask me, right?
I'm an executive. I'm from corporate. I'm here to help.
Yeah, no, Dan, I work on this, and it's a great reminder that has helped my leadership development and helped me get more presence and more credibility at tables I sit at, because I ask myself that question and most often don't say anything. Now, I might go say something afterwards. It's a timing issue, right? But did I need to say something at that meeting? I still may follow up afterwards and make a note, but I didn't need to do it in front of that audience.
Well, there you go.
Excellent advice.
I think it's wonderful advice. Well, I want to make sure that we stay timely here, but this has been so delightful, and we've gotten some great questions in from our listeners, and I wanted to thank you for being so generous with your time and speaking with us. I know that there are a lot of people who are interested in learning more about compliance and risk and what it's like to work in different organizations, so I think this was timely and extraordinarily helpful.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is a great format, and you guys are just doing a fantastic job. So thanks for letting me be part of it. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Jenny. It was great to have you, and we look forward to the next time, because it sounds like it'd be easy for us to pick up and continue this conversation.
I think that might be on the agenda at some point.
We hope you'll join us again.
Have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.